There's a lot of anger and negative emotions out there around what we're doing in Ontario with our environment. And I see that anger and I share that anger. We need to get it right. We're not in a place where we have years to waste as we try to decide what policies and what environmental approaches are the best ones. We need some positive action on the ground. So, I started my career with conservation authorities. I'm a member of a number of NGOs. I'm a member of a number of industry associations. I do my best to listen to everybody and understand multiple perspectives, because I think the only way we'll move forward is if we constructively listen and respect people's different perspectives. We can find solutions, and those solutions might require us all to work together. I do a lot of, in the 40 some odd years of consulting, I've done a lot of work with the private sector. And the private sector work includes land developers. And there's a lot in the media right now about land developers are greedy and they're trying to destroy nature to build communities. And I choose to work with people in the development industry who I trust and I believe. I'm working with people right now who are determined to make a positive difference. They're not interested in removing natural areas. They're interested in building really healthy communities where people can interact with nature in different ways. And as part of that, they're looking at setting aside large blocks of land and restoring pockets, open areas in forests so that the forests will be more productive. So I've learned that I can make a choice myself personally with the projects I work on, with the developers I work with who I collaborate with to find innovative solutions. We all have choices. I make those choices for myself because I want to make a difference in the next number of years, a positive difference in nature. I love nature, and I'm not going to personally or as a professional do something that I'm not satisfied with. We've got to have positive outcomes. Like I said, net positive or nature positive outcomes. We're beyond the point of allowing a bunch of natural areas to be removed. One of the moments we're at is, in Ontario's context, for example, the threshold is, or the measure of how successful a development is if it can meet a no negative impact test. And that's not enough. I think what we need to do now is we need to reach for net positive. And we're seeing that movement around the world. Some people are calling it nature positive or net positive. We need to go beyond the traditional no negative impact. And then we need to set higher standards for the impact assessment work that we do. The reports that planners read and agencies and regulators read that say, here's what's proposed for a project. Here are the proposed or potential impacts. Here are the potential mitigation measures. Here are the net effects. Therefore, the project can proceed with these kinds of mitigation measures and in some cases offsets. We need to think differently about impact assessment. We're not thinking broadly enough. We're not putting projects in the larger landscape context. We're often not thinking about cumulative effects of projects, not just on one project on one site, but the cumulative effects of several projects in the same landscape. What will that mean to nature and to the natural systems? Part of improving the impact assessment is making sure we've got the best science and the best information, community knowledge, traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge and wisdom, and Western science. A lot of the science we apply in Ontario, for example, for impact assessments is out of date. Nobody's been keeping it up to date. We don't necessarily have current information, so predicting impacts on a landscape or a site becomes more difficult if the data is not current. And part of that can come from an impact assessment generally, but we need to have a better, more complete inventory of our landscape on a regular basis. Because we can predict the impacts, and there are several steps or activities we can do that mitigate those impacts. And the first would be avoidance. We can avoid impacts. We can redesign something, a project or a community, to avoid the important features that need to be protected on the landscape. That's number one, avoidance. Number two is minimize. We can minimize the impacts on the environment by adjusting the design, moving some places so that we're not putting a footprint or a handprint right on top of a natural area. Beyond avoiding and minimizing, we can move to restore. A lot of the natural areas in southern Ontario in particular are degraded. They've been impacted over time from various activities, human use, pets, people using areas for forest production, for harvesting materials. So we can restore some of those natural areas. That's a third piece of the mitigation. The fourth is offsets. Offsets has been subject to quite a bit of discussion, some of it negative, but offsets are really, quite simply, one of the standard impact assessment tools that have been used for decades globally, and we have standards that can be applied globally for that. Offsets are usually removing some features, replacing those features on a different landscape, perhaps nearby, perhaps in a better location, in terms of magnifying positive outcomes with nature. And it's important to mention that you can't offset everything. There are some things, some features on the landscape that should never be considered for offsets. We don't want to use an offsetting tool as some kind of random access to remove more nature. That's not what this is about. This is about the ability to selectively remove very small, perhaps degraded features that aren't performing important functions on the landscape. The next step after offsets in mitigation is something new. It's called Transformative Actions, and it's quite interesting because that's just been added to the Mitigation Hierarchy in an international document, a standard document that's out for draft for discussion right now. I find that quite interesting because Transformative Actions takes us beyond the net positive. It gets us thinking differently, which is what we really need to do. And Transformative Actions could be, for example, deciding we don't want these species at risk to disappear. We're going to consciously increase the population sizes and the distribution of some of these species because we know how to grow plants. We can propagate plants. Some people and places are doing captive breeding of different endangered species. So those are the kinds of transformative actions that we'll need to think about and we'll need to consider, because it's one thing to avoid and to minimize, to restore and to offset. We need to go further. And this new framework, the addition of transformative actions, causes us to really dig deeper and think differently. And a final observation I would make around biodiversity conservation and impact assessment and mitigation is we need to reduce the drama out there right now. There's a lot of anger, a lot of polarized opinions and voices, and I understand that anger. We need to collaborate if we're going to get things done properly. So we're going to have to work across groups that we may not traditionally have worked across. We're going to have to talk to each other, and we're going to have to listen to each other and find some solutions, because we're at a point where we can't allow ourselves to lose all of our energy fighting about things. We need to implement solutions, and we need to implement them more quickly. And out of the 20,000 species in Ontario right now, about 20,000 when you exclude bacteria and viruses, about 1 in 5 of those species is at some level of risk. So we have an opportunity now to accelerate positive steps for those species and make sure that 1 in 5 doesn't go to 2 out of 5. So we have an opportunity now to change the momentum, and that momentum will shift if we can collaborate respectfully and positively.